My name is Jared Arnofsky. I'm a solutions architect at AmericanEagle.com. I've been working with Sitecore for about 10 years. This is my first year, or last year rather, was my first year of getting Sitecore Tech MVP. And I've worked on anything from Sitecore 7.2 to most recently XM Cloud. My primary focus at AE is headless development, XM Cloud, probably for the past 2 years or so, Sitecore Search, XM Cloud, just their DXP in general. Some fun facts about myself is I like to collect vintage action figures, He-Man, Ninja Turtles, wrestling figures, stuff like that. And I live in the greater Boston area with my wife and my 4-year-old son. And then I'll hand it over to Ali.
All right. So my name is Muhammad Ali Khan. I'm from Pakistan, living in Karachi. Mainly, I'm working on Sitecore for 10 years maybe. I'm working on Sitecore. Recently, I got certified in XM Cloud. Um, Apart from Sitecore, I love gardening. That's it. Can continue further.
Sure. So this presentation is Sitecore Search and XM Cloud. It's really just our experiences and our learnings. Ali and myself have done a couple, actually quite a couple XM Cloud projects at this point and a couple Sitecore Search projects at this point, but we wanted to just put together something that, was like a real world example of what we did. So when we say this is Sitecore Search and XM Cloud, we mean XM Cloud with like a headless application. Our headless application, as probably most people are building out their headless applications, is Next.js. It's modified quite a bit because we have our own starter at AE at this point, but it's based off of the original Sitecore starter repository that they give you. And then it's not super important for the notes for this implementation, but we did host this in Netlify for this project. I have a blog post about how we got the code out to Netlify using their CLI, but we're not really going to dive into that in here. So specific stuff about this project. We had 6 unique sources. Some of the sources were in Salesforce. Some of them, actually all of them were non-Sitecore sites. All of them were sites that were owned by other stakeholders. When we were working with the client, it would be a lot of talking to, other vendors and other stakeholders to figure out how we can surface data, within those sites and then, pull it into Sitecore Search and making one unified search. We had about 3,000 PDFs. And we had about 40 languages. So those are just some cool things that we had to do for this project. And then we did like obscure some of the data and simplified some of our concepts, but all of the concepts we're going to talk about and everything that we're going to go through is what helped us achieve the goal of this project and getting through what I just went through. So just a very quick high level on Sitecore Search for those who are new to it. I won't dive super into it. Bala and Madhu have made a pretty good 101 search presentation that I recommend you watch. It's already on YouTube, and they go through a lot of the fundamentals. But Sitecore defines Sitecore Search as an AI-driven headless content delivery platform that lets you create predictive and personalized search experiences across multiple content sources. Essentially, Search is a product in their DXP ecosystem. It's a good fit for Sitecore XP. It's a good fit for XM Cloud. It could be a good fit for, any site. You don't need to be in the Sitecore ecosystem if you want to use it. And like I said before, it has the ability to unify your search experience across many different sources. It collects user analytics when they're using the search. And Sitecore gives us a suite of software development kits to jumpstart our development, and we'll be diving into those a little bit more. I like to always throw this slide in my presentation. When you do a DXP project or a Sitecore Search project or an XM Cloud project with Sitecore, you are given a partner technical advisor. I have the luxury of always working with Rich, so I just like to give him a shout out. They're instrumental in getting your projects done with best practices. It's someone that you can sound your ideas to, get some feedback from, maybe even teach them something. And yeah, just a great experience. And Rich is someone I always collaborate with, and really enjoy having him on the project. And he was instrumental to the success of this project. For the agenda tonight, I grouped it into two sections. So we're going to talk about the Sitecore Search SDK. And when we talk about the Sitecore Search SDK, we're going to talk about integrating the Sitecore Search React SDK. We're going to talk about extending the Sitecore Search React SDK, adding some features to it. And we're going to talk about how we did some search configurations, how we controlled it, how we made some things variables, etc. And the second half of the presentation will be about Sitecore Search data crawling. So we're going to go through some examples, and these examples is, what we use for most of the 6 sources to an extent, but it's the basic information that should get you there. The idea is that you can take this information and you should be able to apply it to how you're going to do your sources. So we'll go through sitemap data crawling and extraction. Then we'll talk about what we have to do to make it multi-language. And then we'll walk through our unique solution for PDF metadata crawling. And we can talk about what Sitecore recommends there, and what we ended up having to do and why we did it. So I'll pass it over to Ali to talk about the Sitecore Search SDK.
Thanks, Jared. So there are 2 possible ways to integrate Sitecore Search. The very first approach is to use REST APIs, which we usually use when we are working in non-React environment, like we are working on .NET-based projects or any other tech stack. So we have a couple of endpoints which we can use to retrieve data, and everything, all of the credentials can be managed from customer engagement console, which is our Sitecore Search portal. We can also explore these REST APIs directly from customer engagement console. The next approach is to use Sitecore Search SDK, which is very convenient, very easy to use. Basically, it covers all of the use cases which are part of the typical Sitecore Search experience, like pagination, search results, facets, everything, every bit is covered in this SDK. And basically, this SDK works in conjunction with Sitecore Search UI. So to start utilizing React SDK, this Sitecore Search SDK, we need to use 2 main packages, which is obviously Sitecore Search React SDK, and the another one is Sitecore Search UI. We For any React application, we need to wrap the widget provider component, which is available in Sitecore Search SDK, where we can supply our customer key, API key. Customer key and API key are 2 main attributes by which we can connect with Sitecore Search portal. Next, we have query hooks. These are the main.
Oh no, did we lose Ali?
Did we lose him?
We'll give him a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, guys. Let me chat him. We'll give him a minute. I can take over if I need to as well, but I think.
Yeah, let's give him a minute. No rush.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty late there, right? Like it's 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Occasionally he has some internet issues. No, he's back. He should be good. You might have to make him host again.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I'm sorry, guys, not sure what happened. Zoom stopped working.
It's okay.
All
Am
good.
I audible?
You're good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you.
We just need you to put your camera back on.
Mhm. Where is that?
Maybe he didn't do the offerings to the demo gods, probably.
All right, so let's continue. So the next main important thing at the time of integration is using query hooks. So there are a couple of query hooks available in Sitecore Search SDK, and a couple of them are mentioned here, like use preview search, use search results, and use content block. So widgets are basically configured in customer engagement console, and we can use those widgets using query hooks. So most commonly used query hook is this use search results. If we go next slide, get it. So this is the basic implementation of use search results, where we can supply a couple of variables like sort type, default page, and default key phrase. So it will return everything against that default key phrase which we supply. Like for example, any of the query, any page, any kind of filter we can supply using within this query object, it will return those results in this results object. It has some generic response where we have a couple of actions. Like all of these methods are returned from this use query hook, like on facet click, on clear filters, like all of the data, facets, sort, content, everything is returned in one single call. And that these results can be used in our React UI components. Jared, if you can,
Yep.
uh, you guys can stop me if you have any kind of question. So next we have Sitecore Search UI. Uh, it has all pre-built components like which are normally used in creating of our Sitecore Search experience, like accordion facets, article card, card view switcher. Article card is basically used for to render search results, and there are a couple of others which we can use to create our Sitecore Search experience. Sitecore Search UI is again the npm package which we need to install in our React application. Jared, next slide. So we chose to implement Sitecore Search SDK starter kit as an starter point for the project which we worked on. So starter kit is a GitHub project. It covers all of the basic scenarios and use cases for any typical search experience. It took me only maybe less than 2 hours to integrate to complete our Sitecore search experience using this starter kit. So it leverages both Search UI SDK out of the box and contains correct usage and placement of all elements needed in the SDK. Uh, and also it includes base level styling. It also uses one third party library called styled components, which we will discuss further. So this project specifically did not have a lot of hours, so we chose this way to integrate using SDK starter kit. Moving forward, uh, so how what we did was we leveraged most of the code from Sitecore Search starter kit, and there were a couple of prerequisites like before proceeding, we needed to ensure a couple of prerequisites are met, like with initial configurations and customer engagement consoles, like sources are already created, uh, facets, sorting options are already created. So these are a couple of prerequisites which are supposed to be done before leveraging code from starter kit. So next thing is, yes, I think I have mentioned configure suggestion block. This is again used for generating suggestions when we type in our query string in search text box. So we need to configure sorting options and pre-configured widgets. These configured widgets are already configured, like search results page and preview search. These widgets are already configured when we get our Sitecore search environment. Next. So the very first step to leverage code from a starter kit is to copy these folders like context, data, HOCs, hooks, and themes. Context folder includes most of the language context, and we
Oops,
have
sorry.
another.
Sorry.
No issues. HOCs folder include this is higher order component, which includes component for tracking user behavior, and widgets is the main folder here, where we will create our Sitecore search main widget. If you move forward, Jared. So we need to create a folder in our Sitecore Next.js solution. We need to create a folder named widgets, and we need to copy these preview search results, and utils.tsx. Utils.tsx is the file where all of the main methods are available from the starter kit. And when we copy the code from starter kit, we might face some formatting issues. So we can update our prettier file as shown in this screenshot. Basically, end of line should be auto rather than Control F. Moving forward. So the next thing is we need to configure our environment variables in env file with customer key and API key. And app.tsx is the main starter point for any React application. So we need to update widget provider in app.tsx. And the next thing which we did was to replace use navigate with next router everywhere, wherever it was referenced in any of the copied component. So if we go next, Jared. So create search rendering. Yes. So now at this point, we can create our Sitecore search component, and so create search.tsx file. Search.tsx file is the main file which will be communicating with Sitecore and Sitecore Search SDK, the widget which we have copied. So if you look at this screenshot, we are calling search results widget, which is coming from widgets folder search results, and we are just providing the default key phrase and the widget ID, which is directly copied from customer engagement console. And if you look at the line number 8 with page tracking, this is the higher order component HOC, which enables the user analytics tracking. And once all of these steps are done, completed, we will be able to, if you go next slide, Jared. Yes, so now we are ready to drop this component on our Sitecore, any of the Sitecore page, and our final end results should be like this. All of the facets are created for us. Everything is created for us out of the box. I mean, by copying all of these widgets from a starter kit. So this is our end result. Okay, add additional styling to meet design. So this was our project which we worked on. So initially it was like we saw in the previous slide, and after applying our styling, this is the end result for the search component. Okay, so this is the new.
Lee, do you mind me just adding one more thing real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add in that a lot of the steps that we described in the beginning about like some of the prereqs and requirements that Sitecore in the starter SDK solution, they do walk you through like setting up some of that stuff. So it's not like we had it It's not like we had to figure out how to do a lot of those things. It's just like to use the out-of-the-box analytics and some of the things and some of the tracking. There's some prereqs that you have to follow and set things up so that everything works out of the box. And then the stuff that we had to figure out and what we documented is pretty much like, what we said about copying some files here, copying some files there, and like, changing some site configurations. So if you look in the repo, you will see some of those prereqs and some of those actual steps you need to take. You can go, Ali. Thank you.
Thank you for covering this, Jared. So tracking user interactions, we have a couple of global events available directly in SDK. So there are two main events which are available in SDK: track view event, which is usually dispatched when visitor views our widget, and track page view events is dispatched when visitor views our web page. So sometimes in other non-React based applications, we can use track view event, or in next React based applications, we can use track page view event, because uh, usually in non-React based projects, we directly use widgets using widget component available in SDK. And so track page view event, if you go next slide, Jerry. So this is the basic implementation of track page view event, where we are supplying a couple of parameters, like what is the name of the page which we are on, and the ID of the entity, and page view payload. Payload is something whatever the query we are running on that particular search page. So everything is supplied in this one object to this track page view event. Everything is taken care of by this global event, and all of the analytics will start appearing on our customer engagement console. Yes, so this is the output of those analytics, like how many visits are there, how many page views, unique page views. So this is the end result of this tracking. All right. So there are a couple of search experience enhancements which we did for our project, which were not available in the starter kit, neither they are part of their SDK. So there, there were a couple of things which we had to manage from our Sitecore environment, like facets, sources, and search languages. There was a scenario where we had to display search results from specific sources. So that is why we created a multi-list field as a data source item. We created a multi-list field in Sitecore, and uh, then we were able to select what sources are supposed to be used in our Sitecore search query. And same goes for languages and facets. But what facets are supposed to be shown first, supposed to be displayed in our search results. Uh, then we can also configure page size and page numbers to show in the pagination. That by default it is 10, but we want to show 5, 6, 7 based on the design. So these are the couple of configurations which we can manage from Sitecore. If you go next. Okay, so this is the basic code snippet where we can supply sources and facets to our Sitecore use search results query hook to set sources and these facets by default. So this set search facet and set sources, these methods are available in SDK. So we just have to pass in source IDs and facet IDs to this query, and that's it. Our results object will cover everything. Uh, Next, we have append facets pagination and query string. Yes. So this is really important from SEO perspective, and also sometimes we need to share search URLs with pre-selected facets and filters. So in order to implement this, we utilized their default methods like on facet click, on sort change, on page number change. These are the default events available from SDK, which we override something like this on. We overridden those methods with update facet search params. We created our overridden method and implemented our own custom functionality to update whatever function. Let's suppose we are clicking on any facet. So facet ID should be appended into the query string. Similarly, on page number change, on what page number we are, it should get appended into the URL. So this is how we can, this code snippet shows how we can override the existing available methods. If you go to the next slide, we will see the implementation of this update search params method. So what we are doing in here, we are just grabbing the current URL with query string, modifying, removing, and adding the new query string parameters as per our selection from search page, and again we are sending it back to the URL using React router dot push method. So this is how we are modifying our query string. And there was another thing which we implemented: facets show more and show less. By default, Sitecore Search API returns all of the facets. Let's suppose if we have more than 100 facet values against each facet, so it will render all of those facet values. So we implemented this show more and show less functionality. If you look at the screenshot, we have five five facet values are being shown. So if you click show more, it will append other five facet values. So these are, so in order to implement this, we utilized state mechanism of React, and we created our own custom methods like handle show more and show less, which we further utilized on anchor tags. Like show more is basically an anchor tag, and this piece of code portrays that we are rendering the number of facets which are supposed to be shown in the facets list. So this is how we are controlling the number of items to show. We are using filtered items. So this is the basic code snippet to render facets. And moving forward, yes, these are the anchor tags for show more and show less. As you can see, handle show more and show less methods are being called on click event of these anchor tags. So these were a couple of enhancements which we did from our site to create good user experience. So Jared, this is all from my side. If anyone has any question, I'm open for any question.
Yeah, I think we have some time at the end for QA. I know we went through a lot, and this, I said in the beginning, I think, but like this isn't like a 101 implementation guide. This is, Bala and Madhu have made that before. So this is kind of just getting into the, the gritty of doing the implementation. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask them at the end when we have some time, and you can always reach out to myself or Ali, or reach out to Bala, Madhu, to get in touch with us. And we're both, Ali and myself, are on Sitecore Slack, so happy to answer any questions as well. Okay, so Ali covered the SDK and how we implemented it. And then the next step, so the first, we kind of worked on them in parallel, to be honest. Like, we were able to start pulling the data into our index and crawling the data at the same time while we were figuring out how to implement the SDK. So I'm going to go over some of the data crawling and examples that we did. So I've made I made this nice little table. You can tell I'm an engineer and not a designer. It's not super pretty or anything like that. But for Sitecore Search, this is a very simple example of one of the sources that we did. So you create a source. You see this, I have this big box up in the top called Sitecore Search, and then on the bottom I have a box for website. So we have a source. Our source could be anything. Our source could be one of your sites, could be a JSON data feed. It could be an API. It's just a piece, a collection of your data. So let's, for the sake of this argument, let's call it website one. And then your source has a trigger. Your trigger could be, many different types of triggers, but in this example, we're using a sitemap trigger. A sitemap trigger is just saying, what do we want to index? What are we looking at? So our sitemap trigger also has, so then we also have a document extractor. Our document extractor runs after the trigger looks at your sitemap. The document extractor pulls out the data per, row entry in your sitemap, for example. So the sitemap trigger looks at your sitemap on your site, and then on a per page level, the document extractor, in our case, gets all of the information from your markup or your HTML, et cetera, et cetera. So probably the hardest part of this whole project, as Elise said, like putting the SDK into the solution was pretty minor. We had within a couple hours, we were able to leverage the SDK starter. If you didn't want to use the starter, you definitely could have used just the SDK itself and pieced it all together, styled it, and did what you needed to do. We saved a lot of time just putting the SDK starter into the solution and then styling it. The hardest part for us was figuring out how to align 6 different sources with 6 different product owners on different teams and vendors that control each one of these 6 sources, and coming up together with aligning on what are the fields within our search. How are we going to expose those fields? How are we going to standardize them across all of the sources? And how are we going to show them? Like, so in our scenario, we decided to do meta tags. Some of the other websites that we were using, they were other, I won't say the names, they're just other CMSs and other things outside of the Sitecore ecosystem, or one of them was a Salesforce website, and we just needed a universal approach that we could have a similar setup across all of those sources. So we agreed upon having these meta tags. So we had category, product, asset type, solution, date, description, and we had a language tag as well. One of the bigger ideations, so like thinking differently about this as opposed to using maybe Solr or Coveo or something in the past, is there's no computed indexes. So when we have solution, like one of the meta names solution, we had many different types of solutions. So we needed to just make sure that we were showing that information on the page. So like instead of having like a computed index, our logic went into the headless application and just made sure we are showing that content, standardized and correctly. So you can see it's like solution 1, solution 2, harvesting. That should really say solution 3, and then solution 4. Let's see what else. So once we've had the data identified and we want to make a source, I picked Web Crawler Advanced. Web Crawler, you could use Web Crawler, you could use Web Crawler Advanced in this scenario. The advanced one gives you a couple more options. So we had some, security on some of the sites we were doing. So we needed to pass headers and stuff to get around that security. So if you use the Web Crawler Advanced, you get to handle stuff like that. You can also handle multiple languages, which I'll talk in a future couple slides. But you could also use this a web crawler if you just have a sitemap that you're looking at. And again, I'll get into like sitemap indexes and multiple languages in a further slide. Once we set up a sitemap trigger, so in this example, I'm just gonna go back real quick. We're gonna just talk through this sample, right? With the source, the trigger, sitemap, and the data. So we set up our trigger. It's just looking at a sitemap. And this is in the CEC console. Then we're going to just set up our document extractor. So you see our extractor type is JavaScript. It uses Cheerio.js, which is like a core. It's like a subset of jQuery, like a core jQuery HTML parsing language. So we put our extractor code within. So in here, if you clicked on content under taggers, you could select your extractor. And this is the code that lives within that extractor. So like I said, it runs Cheerio syntax. It's a fast, flexible library for parsing HTML and XML. It's a subset of core of jQuery, which is funny to say because I feel like as developers, we don't really touch that anymore, but it was really useful and pretty easy to use for this project. And we really enjoyed it. You can hard code data in here. You can write your own JavaScript and your own logic, whatever you need to do. You can do that. So you'll see it says function extract. So some of the stuff is just boilerplate. And then we have a response.body. And then we handle what we want to do and return our object. So you see we return name, description, category, product, asset type, solution. These are all of our fields. And this is assuming that we have set up our fields in Sitecore Search. In my next slide, I'll show you that real quick. But you can see now we're just parsing like the meta tags. So like line number 11, the description, just pulling from the meta tag description and pulling out its content. You'll see lines 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe 16, we have a string array, so multiple different values. But again, it's just looking at that meta tag and finding the values. And then we have some checks like up on line 3 to make sure we don't, add anything to the index if it's null. And then this is what I was talking about before. Fields in the index are called attributes, and you can just add your attributes here. So you could have ran that data extractor that we just had, and there's a couple base fields in Sitecore Search like URL and ID and stuff, and that stuff would get populated, but all those other fields wouldn't have gotten populated until you went in here and just added those fields. Again, I'm not going to go into super detail about how you do this. There's good documentation. And again, Bala and Madhu have a nice Sitecore Search 101, but you can control in here, what's a facet, what's filterable, et cetera, et cetera. But for this conversation, all you need to do is make sure you add your fields that are here in your extractor and make sure you're adding them here. And then your attribute name is the same spelling as how it would be in your extractor. And then the last step, you can set up a crawling schedule. So you just tell it when you want it to crawl and it'll run on that time. So we had it to run at like 6 a.m. every day. This is again within the CEC console for Sitecore Search. And then you can see once we do that, you can see that there's some results here within the content collection. And then you'll see if you click on that content collection, you can see some of the data being pulled into there from that page. Okay, so now I just want to talk about a scenario that we used heavily is, well, what happens when you have multiple languages? How do you handle that? So our scenario was, I'm not sure if it was unique just to this client, but they had for their sources, they usually had a different sitemap per language. So it might be like enus.site.com, like NL for like Netherlands.site.com for different languages. So for this one, you can see that the image is very similar before where there's Sitecore Search up top in that block and the website down there on that block. But you'll see we have now a sitemap index trigger. And then to the right of that, you'll also see now we have a locale extractor. So when we are doing the advanced crawler and we have multiple languages, or regardless if you're using the advanced crawler, you need to set a locale. So if you just have one language, you would just set it as English. If you're using the non-advanced web crawler, I don't think you have to set a language at all. I think it would just do English by default. But in our scenario, we have multiple languages. So we've introduced the sitemap index trigger, which looks at a sitemap index. For those that are not familiar with that, it's just a collection of sitemaps. So you have a sitemap index that we are pointing our trigger at. That's the main difference. And we have a locale extractor. So that changes up the picture just a little bit. So within your source, there's a section for available locales. You can go into the domain settings on your CEC console in Sitecore Search, and you can manually add as many locales as you want. We've done 44. I think you can probably do more. I don't know if there's a hard stop. But you can add your locale. Once you've added them in your domain settings and you've configured them, you can put them in here. And you add whatever locales that you want for this source to be in. So for this source, just for this example, we're saying it's these 5 languages. And then we, like I said, we set up a sitemap index. Sitemap index trigger has these URLs. So you'll see it was like es.website name, www.samplesite.com is like the English one. That's actually a typo. It should probably say like en. And then we have pt, de, and l. So each one of these URLs is supposed to be a different sitemap in a different language. And then the other difference that you do here is once you set up those locales, you need to set up a locale extractor. So your locale extractor is when the trigger looks at your sitemap index, it then needs to set the locale and then extract the data. So we can't set the locale in the data extractor. We set the locale in the locale extractor. So all we're doing here is, if you remember, I'll go back really quick. We set the language. It's set in a meta tag. So see, it says lang equals enus. So when we are here in our extractor, all we're doing is it's the same $ equals response.body. So it's the same thing that we're extracting from to get our data. And we're just saying the locale equals the HTML. Look at for the attribute called language. And then we have some logic in here that says if it's ESES, set it to ESES. We did it this way just so we could have a fallback if you don't find a match. Okay, so the next thing we did was PDF metadata crawling. So Sitecore Search out of the box has a way to crawl PDFs, and it might be a good fit for your organization. Essentially, what they recommend is that you configure a JavaScript document extractor to extract the HTML. And then once it's in HTML, then you would parse it just as we just did in the previous example. What that does is assume that your PDFs are standardized and set up so that it has all the correct metadata in there. And like I'm sure many of you are probably thinking, if in this scenario, if a client comes to me with 3,000 PDFs, those PDFs are probably from many different years. They're not standardized. They're not all the same. So it just wasn't a good solution that we could use. So we had to think of something different here. So what we did is we implemented a JS trigger, and you'll see to the right of it, we still have a locale extractor. Under that, we still have a document extractor. The only thing that's different now is we have a JS trigger and we have an HTML PDF listing page. So instead of looking at a sitemap or a sitemap index, we're looking at an HTML page. So the client was able to get us on a nightly basis because, again, we weren't controlling these PDFs and where they live. They didn't live in Sitecore. They weren't in some place that like I could control. So we were able to work with that vendor and figure out a listing page. That listing page, this is kind of crude, so apologies, but that listing page, we just figured out what did we want for our metadata. And then we had a couple different listing pages. So we actually had HTML listing pages for all 3,000 PDFs. And then each page would be divided up into maybe like a category or something. For how we're indexing it, it didn't really matter. But the point was the requirement was from the external data that it had to be split up in a certain way that their CMS was able to output it. So we were able to take all of our metadata and put it into a table. Now, like you could not use a table. You could have used like a JSON data feed. I imagine if we were doing something with Content Hub, we could have taken the API approach and gotten all of the JSON data and the metadata that way. But this is something that worked for the client, and it worked well for us. So we had certain fields like the type, the title, the file name, the description, all these same fields that you saw in the metadata before. And then you see language and the link text. The link text is important because that's the actual link to the PDF. So this is, this is just the HTML of what I just showed you, just one row of data. So essentially they just made a big body table. They gave it an ID that we could get to and parse. And then they identified the columns, which were the data that we agreed upon, which is the same data that surfaced within all the other sources, because again, we're making one unified search. And they put in all the data and formatted it the way that it needed to be formatted. So what we did differently is we used a JS trigger in the CEC console. And that trigger right here, what it does is it takes all the base URLs of all of the PDF listing pages. So we have manuals, documents, and diagrams. Like I said, it was divided from the third party, so they just needed a way to split it up. But to us, it didn't matter. And what we did was we declared all of our locales within this JS trigger. And then we passed them each one by one as a query string and pushed to those URLs. So essentially we said, go to this URL, query string this language. And we did that for all of them. So we went through every single locale that we're using, every language, and went through all of our base URLs to do that. And then what happened was in our locale extractor, you can see that that also had all of our locales in it. And then every time we went through a request, it would look at that query string and then return that locale. So that's how we would set the language accordingly for, the 44 languages that we were going through. I simplified it, but that's the approach that we took. So then when we go into our JS document extractor, which is similar to what we were doing before, this is now, if you look at line 23, I think it is, it's a little small for me, 23, 24, 25. And then you look at line number 3. Every time we set a locale, it has a main locale in the URL. And if the locale is not a match to that main locale, so if the current locale, again, when we're going through this, when we're running through this extraction, if it doesn't match the one that we sent in as the query string, it just returns and we don't add it to our index because each row in our table has a different language associated with it. And then everything else is kind of the same as what we've seen before. We have description, file name, asset, and instead of looking at meta tags, we're just doing, get this TD nth child and getting the data that way.